fortunate, and Tanya actually just popped in for a second. We've been very fortunate to know Tanya for a few years. We've actually walked the campus and saw the facilities that are phenomenal. It's probably one of my favorite universities. I'm jealous. I wish I went to school there. And what they're doing out there, especially on this real estate portion, is phenomenal. Like, I don't know any other university is really pushing real estate investing and learning the commercial end of the business like these guys. Unfortunately, my university did not. So, they've been corporate sponsors of ours for, I think, Tanya, it's been like 3 years since you've been sponsors with us. And we are proud to have such a great team to work with. And this is their first webinar. And I'll let also, we have Alexa, our manager, on here. And Alexa, do you want to introduce our presenters today?
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Today we have Casey as well as Dr. Forgery. They'll be speaking on buying and managing properties, as we will have a raffle. Please pay attention. Text the word, or the text word is NSU. I'm going to put it in.
Oh, you just muted yourself, Alexa.
So sorry about that. Text the text word NSU to 954-737-3239. I just put it in the chat. You will be entered to win our raffle, which is a NSU swag bag and a $25 gift card. So definitely do that. I will be managing the Q&A, so please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section. We'll get those answered either at the end or throughout the presentation. So pay attention. We're going to give out some great information here. Thank you so much for coming again, NSU, and let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, and before, I know we have a few newbies, so in case you don't know who I am, I'm one of the owners of the Broward Real Estate Investors Association, the Miami-Dade Real Estate Investors Association, and WJL Properties. My partner in crime, Ryan Kuhlman, and he's the president of National REIA. He's actually on location at a house looking to buy, so he's out there investing and doing. And again, our commitment is not only do we teach education on how to flip houses, we are truly a network organization. So if you need contractors, title companies, hard money lenders, we literally have everything that you need. Also, our replay, this replay will also be on our YouTube channel. Give us about 48 hours. So by Monday, it should be on our YouTube channel. And again, we're ready for Casey and Dr. Fred Forgy to take over and teach us about commercial properties. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. So I wanted to get started by welcoming everyone to today's webinar. I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Casey Seidman. I'm an Assistant Director of Graduate Admissions, and I'm with Dr. Fred Forgy. And I want to start by talking a little bit about the Master of Science in Real Estate Development program here at the H. Wayne Huizenga College of Business and Entrepreneurship. So first, I want to give you a little bit of an overview. So the Huizenga College of Business is Florida's largest graduate business college by enrollment. So we have over 2,000 students in our program, a lot in our MBA program, quite a few in our growing MSRED program. And we have over 135 different corporate partners, including the Stiles Corporation, First Residential, Castle Group, City Furniture, Publix, Walgreens, Broward County, and many, many more. And what you'll notice about these corporate partners is a lot of them either are in the real estate development space or they have very large real estate portfolios they have to manage. So we've got a lot of experience dealing with people in the real estate development space. Now, I want to give everybody a quick program overview. So the Master of Science in Real Estate Development is a 36 credit hour program, and it's a program that can be completed in one academic year, so long as you start in the fall semester. And what's great about this program is we focus on all aspects of real estate development. We're not married to either finance or construction management or one thing or the other. We focus on all the aspects of it, from finding the plot of land you're going to work on to having a final product, and we focus in commercial real estate development. More importantly, we're housed in something called the Terry W. Stiles School of Real Estate Development. And you might be asking yourself, how did we get that name? So 4 years ago, after the untimely passing of Terry Stiles, Steve Halmos, founder of the Halmos Group, actually brought together a group of local real estate development, of people in the local real estate development field to create a fund to get the naming rights to school named after Terry Stiles. And what they did is they donated the money to us and they got the naming rights and they called it the Terry Stiles School of Real Estate Development. As a result of that, that shows the seal of approval from the local real estate development industry in what we are offering the students of our program. Now, here's kind of a rundown of our faculty. So Dr. Forgey's here today. He's joining me. These are the classes he teaches. We have Dr. Thomas Vertzer as well. He's an associate professor in our program. Those are the courses he teaches. We also want to introduce Dr. Pallavi Awazi. She's an assistant professor. She focuses on the sustainability aspect, which is extremely important as sustainability is becoming very important to how we build property. Another person who teaches in our program is Jorge San Miguel. He focuses on financial modeling. And we also have two of the top real estate attorneys in South Florida who teach in our program, Adam Hanfinger and Gary Singer. Here's our advisory board, which as you can see here, our advisory board is a who's who of the local real estate development industry. We've got Harry Posen, Mark Peterson, Jessica Abramson, Doran Broman, Alfonso Costa, Gloria Fernandez, Dr. Forgey himself, Kona Gray, Stephen Gouache, Jesse Holhauser, Glenn Moet, Debbie Orshevsky, Craig S. Perry, Andrew Remnick, John N. Ropes, Ken Stiles, and Anthony J. Trella. And here's what's great about this Real Estate Development Advisory Board. They help us not only shape our curriculum, but anybody who goes through our program is guaranteed to have one of these people as their mentor while they're in the program. So not only are you learning all of these new skills, you're learning all aspects of the real estate development space, but you're also going to have somebody with that experience serving as your mentor to ensure that you get to where you really want to go. Now, you might be asking yourself, Casey, there's tons of other real estate development programs in the area, and why should we pick NSU's over any other one? Well, I'm going to give you a key example why. There's a couple key examples. One, we focus on the entire real estate development process, not just one aspect. So we're not focused in finance, we're not focused in construction management, we're not focused in any one area. We focus on the entire thing so you can understand what does it mean to build something from the ground up. On top of it, we train you in Argus and ArcGIS. So we're teaching you the prominent cash flow software, which is Argus, but on top of it, we're also teaching you how to use ArcGIS, which is not common in a lot of other real estate development programs. So we're teaching you how to use geospatial thinking to take a look at a piece of land and see how you can develop it and make sure it's the right piece of commercial property. Number 3, site visits are an integral part of our program, meaning that if you join our program, you will go on site visits. You will see what it means to actually go to a site and build it from the ground up from companies that are actually doing it. Our faculty are not just academics, they are practitioners as well. So I'll give you a key example. Dr. Forgey, who is sharing the stage with me today, he himself is a real estate investor and developer who has worked on over 39 different pieces of property. Adam Hanfinger and Mr. Singer are both attorneys who actually currently work in the real estate development space and help companies complete these projects. Dr. Wasley has worked in sustainability. Dr. Vertzer himself is a GIS expert who has served as a principal investigator on quite a few projects with the U.S. Geological Survey. So we've got a lot of that practical experience in our program that's going to get you to where you need to be. Most of our alumni have gone on to work for other great organizations such as the Stiles Corporation, D.R. Horton, U.S. Department of State, Synovus Bank, and many, many more. And finally, the most important point of why us over any other real estate development program in the area is that we have endorsement of the local real estate development industry. Going back on an earlier point, when all of those real estate developers who are part of our board came together and gave us the money to name ourselves after Terry Stiles and give us that namesake, it is a sign of endorsement that we are giving you the skills you need in order to be successful in the real estate development space. And we know how to help you get to where you need to be. Start dates. So we have 5 start dates a year for this program. However, I highly, I'm saying highly 10 times, encourage every single person who wants to start this program, please start in fall 1. This is a cohort style program, and starting in fall 1 ensures that you will be in and out of that program within 1 academic year, and that you're going to get everything you need in the order you need to get it. So if you want to start, I encourage everyone, please start in fall 1. Our courses are offered in 2 formats, online synchronous and on weekends at the main campus in Dade, Florida, on Saturdays from 8 a.m. to noon, and then 12:30 to 4:30. Admissions requirements. So to get started in the admissions, everybody needs to have an application. But for all of you attending today's webinar, if you want to apply today, I'm going to waive your application fee at no extra charge. Second, most important thing, we do need to have your bachelor degree transcripts. Now, if your GPA is above a 3.1, congratulations, you're going to get into our program. If it's below a 3.1, we will need some additional requirements. And these are as follows. We would need a resume, 2 letters of recommendation, and a 500-word essay explaining how the MSRED program will help you achieve your career goals. Tuition and fees. So for the summer term, it's going to be $9.67 a credit hour. However, in the new academic year, it's going to be $9.93 a credit hour. Registration fee is $30 in registration fees, and then typically your student services fees are about $1,500 a year. But being that you're all members of BREIA, we are going to give you a 20% discount in the program, no questions asked. So take 20% off of $9.93 per credit hour, and that's what you're going to be paying for the program. And finally, we offer a $25,000 scholarship called the Terry Stiles Scholarship Award. So if anybody's interested in applying for the program, apply for the scholarship as well. You've got a great chance at getting it, and it's a great scholarship. It pays most of the cost of the program. Financial aid. So financial aid at the graduate level is all student loans. So all you have to do is go online to fasfa.ed.gov, put in your FAFSA, and you'll be eligible for up to $10,250 in federal student loans. If you have any questions about the financial aid process, we have an in-house financial aid counselor. Her name is Pamela Merriweather, and she can be reached at PamelaLM@nova.edu or at 954-262-1133. If for some reason you can't get in contact with her, please contact the NSU Financial Aid Office. Their number is, their URL is nova.edu/financial aid, or they can be reached at 954-262-3380. All right, so I want to open the floor to any questions, but I also want to post my contact information. And if you want to apply today, you just go to apply.nova.edu. That's the application fee waiver code, but I want to open the floor to any questions you may have.
Yeah, it looks like there's no questions in the Q&A, but I do want to make sure, I know some of you guys are not members of BREIA. That discount is only for BREIA members. They will make sure that you're a member. They will contact our office, and that's another reason to become a member of BREIA for $249. And I just want to, again, you're saying it's 20% per credit hour. Right? Look, even the dog's fired up.
36 credit hours. It does happen occasionally. Somebody just slammed my front door, so sorry about that.
No, it's all good. In this new world of how everything works. So it's per credit hour. So if it's 36, we're looking at, we could do some quick math on that. We're basically looking at what, almost an $8,000, give or take.
Give or take.
$500, $8,000 to get your master's. Okay, I want to make sure on that. And I do have some questions actually coming in. So let's see, Michael's asking, what are the requirements if we already have a master's degree?
If you already have a master's degree, sorry about that, people. If you already have a master's degree, same as always, you just apply, send us your stuff, and we'll review it. Same as everybody else.
And then I guess Sam's just asking, I guess, tell us the price per credit hour, please. I think it was what was it per hour? I'm sorry, it was 900 and.
It's going to be, in the new academic year, it's going to be $993. For the summer, it's $967.
Okay, great. And Tanya already put it in the, actually, I'll go ahead and share this with all our users. So the 20% has a monetary value of basically $8,600. That is correct. We are going to be paying you to learn and be in your group. I mean, no wonder everyone loves NSU. What the heck is going on out there? That's awesome. Makes me want to do it, by the way. So yeah, those were the only two questions I got so far. So I'll go ahead and let you keep going, Casey. Yep.
30. Okay, so it's 36 credits.
Yeah, 36 credits. Okay, perfect. So basically, again, just so you guys know, those are some basic requirements that you will need. They are going to waive the $50 application fee. And if you qualify and you get in, and the last thing I noticed was it's a 1-year program if you start in the fall, and it's only on the weekends. So I could get this MS in 1 year.
Yes, it's offered on Saturdays, either synchronously online during the same time or at the Dade campus.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. Great. I'll let you keep going.
Casey, if you can go ahead and close out your screen, then I will start sharing my screen here in a couple of seconds. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. So what I'm going to do is kind of walk through a relatively simple kind of example of kind of a property analysis, kind of taking you through some very basic calculations, just to kind of, in essence, give you an idea of some of the types of things that we do in the program. And then what I'm going to do after I go through kind of this example, both kind of a Word document, but then followed up with an Excel spreadsheet, I'll be more than happy to take any questions that you have and go into material as deep as we can possibly go. And then after that, any of you that are interested in receiving both the Word document as well as the Excel file, you can just email me and I'll give you my contact information in the chat to be able to get a hold of me and to secure that. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So what I've done is put together a little document here. Let me screen share to sort of start us off with a little kind of case study. Okay, everybody should be able to see this on their screen now. And so what I'd like you to do is just kind of read the first little bit of this, kind of get through that first little question. So what we've got is a scenario where you've inherited $300,000 that you would like to invest in income producing commercial real estate. All right. And so what we're going to do is going to take that kind of information and sort of see what we can do with it in terms of a little project that we might be able to invest in and kind of how that will sort of pencil out. All right. And now, as I said, this is a really simple example where I'm not getting into a lot of the intricate details of dealing with the debt service and the taxes and a whole number of other issues that we would ordinarily delve into. This is kind of just to scratch the surface a little bit. All right. So let's just sort of start out. We've got our local commercial real estate lenders for this kind of a traditional sort of property. They're willing to lend up to 80% on the value of the property. And this means that you would obviously be putting in 20% of your own equity into the deal in cash. And so the first piece is just simply saying, okay, what's going to be the maximum amount that you could pay for the investment property given that scenario? So what we're going to just start with is the $300,000 and divide that by the equity. So given that $300,000 is what we have to put up in our equity, and that represents 20% of what we would have to put into the property for the lender to be happy, then that means that we would be able to potentially purchase a property valued at around 1.5 million, okay? So if that's the sort of maximum purchase price, then what does that mean the loan amount would be? Well, if that's the maximum purchase price, then to find the loan amount, we would simply multiply that by the 80% loan to value ratio. And then that gives us 1.2 million as the loan amount. All right. So for these sort of two little questions I asked, how much could you pay for the property? 1.5 million. What would that mean that you could borrow? 1.2 million. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Are we going to use that information a little bit later? But right now we're going to kind of jump into the specific one of the first properties that we want to take a look at. All right. So this one is, we found a small 10-unit apartment complex. And I tried to keep the numbers here really simple so you can kind of understand kind of where the numbers are coming from, where they're going, and what it all means. But in this case, it's a small complex. We've got 10 units. They're all one-bedroom efficiency units, and they're leasing at $1,000 a month, okay? And so what we were wanting to do initially is to find out what our potential gross income is, okay? And potential gross income simply means what is the total amount of rental revenue that we would have coming in on any given year, all right? So to get to that number, what we're going to do is we're going to take the 10 units times $1,000 a month times 12 months, okay? And that's going to give us $120,000 a year, okay, of potential gross income. All right, pretty straightforward. All right, now, over a typical year, we expect that we're going to have some vacancies. And so in this case, we're going to have vacancies of around 10%. All right, so 10% of 120,000 is going to be 12,000 that we're going to be subtracting out each year. Now, sometimes people ask the question, well, what's the difference between a vacancy and a collection loss? A vacancy is basically where the unit is empty, and obviously you don't have anyone paying rent. Whereas a collection loss is where you may actually have somebody occupying the unit, but they're not paying you rent. In either event, you're not receiving that money, okay? Now, the next piece is we're going to have some other income. Now, with apartment communities, the most typical thing in terms of this other income would be something like vending machines, washing machines and dryers on site, that sort of thing. And so we're just going to say we're going to get $1,000 a year of other income generated off of the property, all right? So that's going to give us what our real sort of cash is going to be generated by the property, okay? How much is really going to be sort of hitting our bank account over the course of the year? And that's going to be $109,000. All right, so effective gross income is what we're talking about there. And as I said, that is really in terms of the raw cash that sort of hits your bank account that you then have available to then spend on operating expenses, your loan, those sorts of things. All right, so from that, we're going to say for this particular property that we're going to assume that our effective gross income on the property, or I'm sorry, our total operating expenses on the property are going to be 35% of the effective gross income. Now, operating expenses on a property like this would be anything from property management fees, property maintenance, property taxes, property insurance, any and all sort of associated kind of ongoing expenses that you as the investor or the owner of the property would be paying, okay? Now, obviously your goal is to try to minimize those expenses over the course of a year, but at the same time, you have to be careful that you don't cut back too much on those expenses because then the property may fall into disrepair and not really be as attractive to prospective tenants. So to calculate, we're going to simply take 109,000 times 35%, and that's going to give us $38,150 as our total operating expenses on the property. All right, and then from that, we're just going to simply subtract out those operating expenses from the effective gross income, and that's going to give us what we refer to as our net operating income of $70,850. Now, this is the number that, most of the time, whenever you go searching for commercial properties, that's the number you hear most often quoted. What is the net operating income? So this is the number that basically is available after you've paid all of your operating expenses, after you have taken into account, obviously, vacancy and collection losses, other income, that sort of thing. But this is the number that you would then have available to pay your debt service or your loan, okay? And then anything after you've basically paid your loan, then that money would be what you would have left over, okay? But now what we're gonna do, we're gonna not touch on that right this minute. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take a look at this NOI number. And the reason why this is so important is because this is usually the metric that most investors are going to use to start with to evaluate what a property is actually worth. And so I tend to kind of draw this little diagram that I call ERV, all right? And some of you may have seen this probably before. IRV, okay? The I stands for income, okay? Or in this case, annual net operating income, all right? The V over here stands for the value of the property, all right? And then the R stands for the rate of return or cap rate, okay? So in this particular case, what we are going to make the assumption is that the cap rate, or sort of the required rate of return for the market as a whole, is going to be 5%, all right? So if we put in basically 0.05 here as the cap rate, and we know that our annual income is $70,850, then what we're doing is we're basically solving for the value. Okay, so if I go back over here just to kind of put it over here where you may be able to see it as well, putting those numbers in. And what we're solving for here is the implied value. So all you're going to be doing is taking 70,850 divided by 0.05, all right? And that's going to give you a value of $1,417,000 for this property. So that's what we're going to be calling the implied value of the property, this $1.4 million, all right? So what this means to us is, okay, our initial sort of screening of this property, it meets our initial requirements of it's at or below the amount of money that we would potentially have available to us. If you kind of go back up here to the previous part of the problem, we are working with potentially kind of a maximum value that we could potentially purchase at around 1.5 million. So this property falls a little bit less than that. And that's a good thing for us because that means we've got a little bit of room to kind of work with to hopefully generate a nice little return for ourselves. Now, the next piece of this, or really the last piece before we kind of jump into the discussion on this, is, okay, let's say that this actual property is up for sale and the asking price is 1.3 million, all right? And so my question is, well, yeah, should you potentially purchase this property? Why or why not? Well, given what we have just done with our very simple, sort of analysis, yeah, you probably should consider purchasing this property because what we're saying is, based upon our relatively simple little analysis that we've done, this property has an implied value of 1.4 million. And if we can buy it for 1.3 million, then what we're in essence saying is this property has sort of an excess value to us of 117,000. So if we can buy it for 1.3 million, and then ultimately it's worth 1.4 million, then we've got a little bit of an excess coming to us, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Now, what I've also done, just to kind of, help you out a little bit, is I've got another screen here I'm going to share with you. I'm going to stop share on this one and go to another one here. Hold on a second. Right. And share this one. Okay, so this is a relatively simple spreadsheet, just illustrating what I just did. So this actually does all the calculations for you. And so I set up this example specifically for you guys. And what we do here is to basically take all that information, be the 300,000 equity investment, the requirement of an 80% loan to value, and then it calculates for you. Obviously, if you're putting down 80%, then that, or you're borrowing 80%, then that means that you're putting down 20% in terms of the equity investment. It does the calculation for you. Then it also does the calculation of the maximum amount of the investment property that you can buy and the maximum amount of the loan, okay, by doing those calculations that we showed you on the previous sheet, okay? Then we kind of come down and put in the basic information about the property itself. 10 units, $1,000 a month in rent, works out to be $12,000 a year per unit. Then multiplying that by 12 gives us the $120,000 for potential gross income. Then we can specify what specifically our vacancy and collection losses are going to be. In this case, we're saying they're 10% of the potential gross income. We put in our other income, which actually would be a input cell. And then we solve for our effective gross income, which we had done previously. And then we can change our effective gross income allocation for the total operating expenses and have to calculate what our operating expenses are going to be for the property. And then ultimately give us our net operating income. And then finally, the last little pieces, we put in whatever the prevailing cap rate is in this particular market, and then it will estimate the implied value, and then put in what our purchase price potentially would be, and then what that potential sort of gain or loss would be for us. Now, the neat thing about the spreadsheet, the reason why I kind of went back through this with the spreadsheet, is now we can change the assumptions, okay? What if, for example, instead of having $300,000 available to us, we only have $200,000, okay? How does that change things? Well, as you can see, that means now we can only buy a property worth around $1 million, and our maximum loan is going to be $800,000. But what if the lender is willing to be maybe a little bit more generous and allow us to borrow 85%? Okay, well, then that obviously changes things up a little bit, all right? Or what if they're less generous? And let's say they only allow us to borrow 60%, all right? Then, you know, as you can see there, the flow through effect in terms of the maximum amount that we can spend on the property is dramatically less, okay? So those loan terms and the amount of money that we obviously have available in equity has a huge impact on us. Then we can go down here in terms of the rental income and the property itself. So instead of 10 units, let's say it's 15 units. How does that change things? Instead of $1,000 a month, what about $1,400 a month? Okay. What about a 15% vacancy rate and maybe $5,000 a year of other income? And maybe we're able to lower our operating expenses down to 30%, and our cap rate maybe 6%. And for this property, maybe $2 million is what we're able to acquire it at. So what does that mean? Our potential gain or loss is going to be, in this case, with all those revisions, then this other property would potentially, gain $550,000 of additional sort of value for us. So my point with this, with the spreadsheet, the nice thing about it is you can go in and kind of replace those original values with your own values to kind of tinker around with it and sort of see what the impact would be on your property. Now, as I said earlier, let me kind of go back, stop sharing my screen here for a second. As I was saying earlier, this is just a very, very basic, simple sort of investment analysis. This is kind of what we would cover in the first, let's say, like we are sort of here, in the first 30 minutes of our real estate investments course, to kind of just break the ice and sort of say, okay, here's a relatively straightforward scenario. Here's kind of how it's sort of set up. Here are the details. But then what we then begin to do as the class progresses is to make it ever more so complex by adding in, obviously, the debt, adding in tax issues with regard to income tax, dealing with depreciation, dealing with any sort of other deductions that you may have available to you as an investor, as like whether it's Section 8 housing, whether it's low income housing tax credits, dealing with historic properties and historic tax credits. Also looking at multi-year sort of pro forma projections as to how the property would be expected to perform over the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and what the changes and assumptions would be for each of those years kind of moving forward. Then also being able to kind of think, well, you may not always just have one investor. You may have 2 investors, 5 investors, 10 investors. How would you go about structuring this in terms of who gets paid, when do they get paid, how much do they get paid, and what we would sort of call kind of a waterfall effect of, in essence, you have one investor that wants to be paid every year based on the operating cash flows of the property, but yet you maybe have another investor that's simply saying, yeah, I don't really care about those operating cash flows. What I'm most concerned with is the value of the property at the time of sale. So that, we plan to hold this property for 5 years. How much is it going to be worth 5 years from now? And being able to calculate what their sort of rate of return would be. And so there are a number of other aspects, whenever it comes to real estate investment, we're going to be looking at different property types. So, in addition to apartment buildings, looking at shopping centers, looking at mixed use properties, office buildings, warehouse buildings, hotel properties, hospitality in general. And so, I guess my point with that is this little example that I gave is kind of the beginning point for a lot of the more complex stuff as we kind of move forward in that particular course. So with that, what I'm going to do is just kind of now open it up for questions and kind of take those questions for the remainder of the time and see where those lead us. Okay. Anish?
So I know I always get some questions also. Actually, they just private chatted me on that. Vacancy. So one of the questions was, I know you're using 10%. Are you finding some of the lenders are picking 20% or 15%? Is that the industry average when you were trying to figure out the loan amount, or what you've seen?
Ultimately, at the end of the day, that whenever the lenders go through their underwriting process, they're probably going to take a look at what the market as a whole is doing. And if your numbers that you're submitting in your pro forma are pretty consistent with what the market is saying it is, then they're probably going to go with that. However, having just said that, some lenders are going to be a little bit more risk adverse and say, hey, the market may be at 10% or 15%, but yeah, we're going to go ahead and take another haircut off of that and say, well, what if it's 20% or more, and stress test basically the model to make sure that they ultimately are going to get paid. Because the lender's only real concern is they're going to be paid. And so whatever you have to do to be able to kind of make your case that maybe this property is special in some way, that maybe the leases that you have on the property are hopefully more sound than maybe the average lease in the market, or maybe this property is a relatively new property that has a lot of market appeal relative to maybe some of the older products that may be in the market. So there are a variety of arguments that obviously you can have with your lender to kind of maybe justify one sort of vacancy rate or another. But, being able to go into a lender and say, okay, I already have 100% of the units fully leased. Here are the leases to justify that. That's going to go a long way to hopefully, alleviating some of their concern. But also the thing that people have to understand, at least in my mind, lenders are retailers. And what I mean by that is no two lenders are equal. They all have special deals and special projects or project types that they're more prone to finance or maybe more lenient on than maybe another lender. And so it's no different than, you going to, let's say Wells Fargo versus Bank of America and you getting a checking account. Every single one of them has a little bit of a different deal going on. But even within those banks, but let's say that you find out, okay, let's say Wells Fargo, just to pick one, let's say they have the most amazing deal ever on car loans, okay? And you establish a relationship with Wells Fargo because of this car loan that you obtained, and your inclination, human nature, is going to be, oh, I need to do a real estate investment loan. I'm going to stick with Wells Fargo because they already have all of my information. I already have this car loan with them. But what you may find out is if you actually researched it, it could be that Wells Fargo has the absolute worst terms whenever it comes to lending on investment property. But yet they may, in essence, keep you as a customer simply because you have this perception that, they're your lender, your go-to lender. And so I guess the lesson there is to shop around for different lenders in terms of what their requirements are. You may find one that has a higher interest rate, but with that higher interest rate, maybe you may have to put down a little bit more money as a down payment, or maybe not. You may have some lenders that have a lot of upfront fees that you have to pay on the loan itself to obtain the loan. Other lenders, maybe not so much. So my point with that is that if you think of lenders as retailers, it makes a lot more sense because you could line up 10 different lenders and there's a very, very strong chance that every single one of them is going to have some potentially very significant variation in what they're going to offer. And you just got to be kind of willing to kind of delve into that. And so like in our real estate finance course, which is kind of the other side of the table of looking at everything from the lender's perspective, of looking at what are all of these different ways that the lender can make money off of prepayment penalties, off of loan origination fees, off of ongoing administrative fees, and a whole number of other things that could very easily change your effective cost of borrowing as a borrower. So my point with all of that it does get very complex, and being able to kind of delve into that deeper is part of what we do. I know it's a very long answer to your pretty short question, but I hope that it kind of gave perspective.
No, that was great. And I'm just going to let anyone know, if you guys work for Wells Fargo Loans, we're not picking on you. They're going to be like, what? Why are they bashing us? No, I'm just playing. So Michael's got a good question. How do you know the cap rate to underwrite for a given market? So I know we're using.
Most of the time what you can do, once again, this is probably the best example of just using Google, that you can pretty much type in any market that you're interested in, type in cap rate, type in, Miami, type in Fort Lauderdale, and then in some cases it's going to be broken out. And usually like folks like CBRE and others will typically publish information about what prevailing cap rates are in any particular commercial market, because it's going to be different for the property type. It's going to be different for the market. It's going to be potentially the sort of thing that can change in a relatively short time horizon. So just because it's 5% today doesn't mean it's going to be 5% tomorrow. Or just because it's 5% on, let's say, a high end apartment community, it might actually be 8 or 9% on a lower quality, higher risk sort of property. So, those are the sorts of things that, it's unique to a specific market, specific geographic region, and a specific sub-market and property type to be able to kind of get at that. But usually what you're going to do is probably have a range and kind of say, what's the worst cap rate it could be? What's the best cap rate it could be? And sort of see, what that range of values would sort of give you, and to try to be realistic. I think that one of the biggest mistakes that I typically see investors make is they're overly optimistic with their projections on income. They're overly optimistic on their, allowances for vacancy. They're overly optimistic on everything, whatever it might be. And that's why, in many cases, lenders, will take what you're giving them, and then they're going to do their own analysis and sort of say, we don't necessarily believe this. We want to make sure that this is truly what the market will support. And you're not living in some sort of pie in the sky kind of false reality of what the real rental rates are and vacancy rates and expenses and so forth.
And I'm just going to add to that, because especially on the other end of it, as like realtors, and they're going to sell you the world, right? They're going to position it that the rents are X amount, right, $1,000 a month or whatever it is, but it's way under market value. You should be getting $1,500, right? I always get those pro formas all the time, and as an investor myself, I say, great, when you get it to $1,500, I'll pay you, the value at $1,500. Right now, it's $1,000. So I think that's always important, and it's a great point also where you're talking about the area, right? Something maybe in Overtown, in downtown Miami, is going to command more than a 5% because the type of class building, right? If it's A, B, or C, you're going to want a higher return because of a higher quote unquote risk, versus maybe something in Coral Gables. I don't know, something that's well established, type A class or class A building is going to get something different too. So Martin's got a question: is the cap rate figured before or after debt service?
No, the cap rate is going to be before debt service. The cap rate is always going to be applied to the net operating income. And the reason for that is that you want to be able to put all properties on kind of an equal playing field without taking debt into account, because the debt that you obtain on the property could be very different investor to investor, okay? So you're going to do return calculations, obviously, after debt, but that's not a cap rate, okay? That is going to be more of your before-tax return on equity or your after-tax return on equity kind of calculations, which is not a cap rate. That's simply what is your rate of return after you've taken into account debt. What are you walking away with as a return on the money that you have personally invested, not what the property is yielding overall. So what you can have happen is you may have a cap rate of, let's say, 5%, but yet you may be borrowing money at, let's say, 4%, and then be able to have a return on investment or return on equity that may be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%, depending on how highly leveraged you are. So, but that's once again, kind of a step beyond what, obviously we went into with this particular little example.
Makes sense. Ed's got a question of, for commercial properties, are 1-year leases typical like residential properties, or are they usually structured longer?
No, almost always commercial. Okay, let me preface this by saying, traditional commercial leases are going to be at least 3-5 years or more. In some cases, like with big box sort of tenants, you may have a 20 or 30-year lease that may be like what's called an absolute triple net lease, where pretty much you as the owner are just getting checks in the mail or not having to do anything ever because the tenant is handling everything. But just a normal, like a small strip center or A small office building, usually, 3 to 5 years is going to be, pretty normal. Now, does that mean that you can't do 1-year leases? No, but usually one of the reasons that you don't do 1-year leases with commercial properties is that you may have to make an investment in terms of tenant finish out as the owner of the property, in getting the property sort of make ready for the tenant. And there may be a lot of stuff that needs to be done. And you don't necessarily want to make that investment for a tenant that's only going to be there for 12 months. Now, if the tenant is willing to obviously pay all of their own sort of make ready or tenant finish out on their own expense, then it may not be that much of an issue to you as the property owner to, take a 1-year lease. But as a general rule, yeah, the leases are going to be longer.
And Elijah's asking, why wouldn't you subtract the debt service costs to get the NOI? Is that not a cost associated with the operation of the investment?
Good question. But it's what you do is you subtract the debt service from the NOI to get what is called before tax cash flow. Okay. And so we didn't go through that in this example on purpose, just trying to, once again, keep it relatively simple. But the before tax cash flow, which takes into account the debt service, then that is the money that you then personally would have available to literally put in your back pocket, or, well, prior to income taxes on the property. But each sort of step within the pro forma, there's a reason why the order exists the way that it does, because you're calculating different sorts of things. And what we're doing with the example that I gave is simply looking at the overall value of the property exclusive of any sort of debt, just looking at it purely as the value of the property as a whole. Now, what we would do, as I said, you would take NOI, subtract out annual debt service. That would give you before tax cash flow. And then you could then calculate a before tax return on equity off of that. Okay. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And again, like today's purpose is to show you some of the basics. And obviously, once you start really peeling the onion,
yes,
like you'll start going on, IRR, cash
absolutely.
on cash. So you got to get the basics, right? Bello's asking, why is it 5 years usually the standard time for buy and hold commercial investments? Like, how did you come
That
up
is
with
an amazingly excellent question. And the reason why, honestly, is because most lenders choose to do 5-year loans on commercial properties. Now, they're not 5-year amortization periods, but they're 5-year sort of balloon notes, meaning that let's say that you borrow $1 million, and at the end of 5 years, what they would do is to say, okay, you still have, after making all of your payments, you still have an outstanding balance of, let's say, $800,000 after 5 years. Then you would have to have a choice to make. Either you're going to refinance the loan, or you're going to sell the property, for the most part, are going to be your two primary options. But the reason why those 5-year loans are so common or so typical is that most commercial loans still are fixed rate mortgages. And so the lender wants to accomplish a couple of things. One, they don't want to lock themselves into a longer loan period than 5 years, because they know that in 5 years' time, interest rates may have gone up, they may have gone down, but they've probably changed. And so it's a chance for them to kind of go back and do another loan. Well, but you also have to sort of step back and say, well, there's another reason. Every time you refinance a commercial loan, most lenders are going to charge you some additional fees, okay? Because this is how they make money. In addition to that interest rate that they may charge you, on the loan, they're going to be charging you basically loan origination fees, more than likely, whenever you go to refinance. Now you may say, well, some lenders don't do that. Well, that's true. But then there's trade-offs, okay? It may be that you have one lender that has ridiculously low interest rates, but then they've got a boatload of fees, okay? Versus another lender that may have a substantially higher interest rate, that doesn't look as good, you know, from an advertising perspective. But then after you peel it back a little bit and you realize that, you know, the lender that has a low interest rate and all these extra fees, that really it's more expensive than maybe the one that has the stated higher interest rate, okay? And so I guess, you know, the point with that is that you have to, once again, continually sort of evaluate what those transaction costs are going to be if you have to refinance that loan every 5 years. Because think about it, if you're planning on holding on that property for 30 years and you're refinancing it every 5 years, those fees can add up significantly. Now, some lenders, you know, do offer longer term loans on commercial property that are 15, 20 years and, you know, may do an adjustable rate mortgage or may do a fixed rate, but maybe at a higher rate. My point with all of this, there are probably 15 or so different variables that you would have to take into account whenever being able to provide an apples to apples comparison of one loan versus another loan as it relates to a commercial loan. Another thing that kind of pops out there, any of you that have ever dealt with like commercial mortgage-backed security loans, in many cases, you may have a situation of where the lender will require a reporting requirement that may be once a month, could be once a quarter, once a year. But what I mean by that is that they will potentially do a deep dive into every single one of your leases, every single sort of dollar that you're spending or retaining on the property, and ultimately, you know, really get up into your business as to how the property is performing. And part of the reason they do that is because then it gives them kind of an early warning system that if something is happening at the property that's not great, like for example, you lost a significant tenant or number of tenants, or people or your expenses are going through the roof, that without that reporting requirement, they wouldn't know that. And what I mean by that is many of you may think, oh, okay, all I have to do is write a check every month to the lender and they leave me alone. That may not be the case with some of these loans. That in some cases, that extra level of reporting, you know, can be obviously a lot of extra work on your part, but also it kind of lifts up, you know, the veil of what's really happening behind the scenes on the property. Okay.
Yeah, and the thing to add to that is because, you know, it depends, like what you're saying, if the more information they get, usually it's a better rate. Even for our club, like we have some lenders that won't ask you as much. They also understand that, you know, it's vacant and you're an investor and you have to fix this up. So you're going to pay one way or another. It's really, you know, either you're going to pay an interest rate, you're going to pay in fees, but as long as your numbers make sense, it's going to make a big difference. I think it's really important that, you know, all lenders are not created equal. So also depending on the lender, and I think it's also about the relationship too. If you have, like what you mentioned earlier was that, hey, I got $1 million sitting in, you know, in my bank account for other stuff, or they might collateralize in a CD or this, and, you know, they're just trying to hedge their risk also, because, you know, again, banks are not, you know, they don't want to be owners of these buildings.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important when you're finding one. I know, let's see, Julio was asking, what's a good lead indicator that a property might be a good deal? Visibly worn down or court issues, like behind on taxes, or maybe something I'm not thinking of?
No, those are all excellent. And I think, you know, in my own personal sort of history, I mean, I've always looked for kind of weird situations, distressed situations, or I mean, I bought a number of properties at one point in time from a family trust that was just simply looking to liquidate a family trust of properties, commercial properties. And they had held on to them in the trust for like 20 something years and were finally ready to sell. And in this particular instance, they were willing to owner finance the properties on top of it. And so, but then also, you know, looking at situations of obviously deaths, looking at divorces, looking at, situations of where maybe the market has changed in some significant way, and properties the folks are potentially desperate to sell for whatever reason. But me personally, I mean, the perfect scenario, which is not so prevalent here, but in some of the markets I've invested in, is anytime that you can find a property at below replacement cost, that's usually a good sign that it's worth taking a look at. But not so much in a market like South Florida, where obviously many things here that come on the market are overvalued. There are still opportunities, no question about it, but you take a look at some tertiary markets, meaning markets kind of outside the mainstream of Miami and Fort Lauderdale and that sort of thing. Look at some inland potentially properties that have maybe strong economic bases, so that there's still value there, but at the same time they're maybe not as overpriced and overpicked as what many of the properties are here. Because here you do end up having to, in some cases, rely on those really special kind of maybe off the market deals, or a totally uninformed investor or owner or whatever it might be. So those are just a few things to think about.
Absolutely. And so, obviously with COVID, what do you think of, I mean, we're a year into this. So I know, like, I have some lender friends. So when COVID first happened, I mean, you're lucky to borrow, money for, a candy bar, I felt like, on that portion. What are you seeing, just being as an investor or really being in the market on the lender side? Have you seen them loosen up on, guidelines, or were they, I'm just kind of curious.
I think, once again, that's going to be a market by market, sort of phenomenon. I mean, I think we're very fortunate, once again, kind of being where we are in Florida specifically, relative to other parts of the country, that clearly we're getting an influx of folks here that many of the parts of the country, that's not the case. That certainly works in our favor. But in terms of the lending community, at the end of the day, yeah, they're going to, on the commercial side, they're going to be, looking at, what is the viability of this tenant under the kind of pandemic situation that we've gone through. And the owners of the property, have tried to figure out creative ways to maybe deal with that in terms of deferring lease payments, but yet extending the term of the lease by another, year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it might be. So, I mean, different strategies, I guess, to try to deal with that kind of potentially loss in revenue and loss of comfort with, what may be taking place with individual tenants. But in terms of, I guess, just lenders' comfort level, we're still not obviously 100% on the other side of this thing, and who knows specifically when we will be. Hopefully, sooner rather than later. But all I can say to that is the lenders are paying attention to this much in the same way that investors or anyone else is, to try to say, what do they forecast to be the market in the next 6 months, year. But as I said, I think Florida is probably one of the safer places to be. Even though there may not be that many opportunities, it's also one of the safer places to be an investor right now.
Absolutely. And can we kind of actually talk about, because I know we're saying we're kind of using the word commercial kind of loosely. Like, can we talk about asset classes within commercial, what you've seen?
Yeah. So, and I'm glad you asked that or phrased that the way that you did, because the way that we sort of define commercial is anything that is owned by an investor that is generating net operating income. And so we're not talking, I mean, in our program, we're not dealing with, for the most part, like building single family residential homes. We're not necessarily talking about the part of the business model that you guys are intimately involved in terms of warehousing, in terms of rehabbing individual homes. That's not a piece of what we sort of consider traditional commercial real estate. Now, commercial real estate can be single family homes that are owned for purely investment purposes. But also apartment buildings, same thing. Now, you will hear other people talk about commercial real estate, not commercial investment real estate. Commercial real estate being limited to office buildings, shopping centers, hotels, warehouses, industrial properties. We are looking at it, at least with the lens within our program, is anything that generates a cash flow to an investor, we consider that to be commercial real estate. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just because I always get a lot of newbies. Yeah, they're like, hey, I want to be in commercial. Okay, industrial. What are you looking at? Office space? Are you looking at multifamily? I kind of joke about it because there's like a specialty for each. There's the general doctor, but you're not, you got a foot problem, you're not going to the cardiologist.
Right.
So you can't blank, like it's a blank check over everything. So I think that's always important, because some people, they've never been in real estate, but I want to be in commercial. They see the big numbers. And I thought I was actually, this is one of my questions actually, because I know you're in development. So what kind of risk do you actually see if you were going to develop a multifamily, or from beginning, because of the time end, with permits, or unless you guys are doing,
honestly, that is probably one of the biggest risks in Florida. I moved here from Texas about 8 years ago, and very different in the sense of the entitlement process. In Texas, you can pretty much pull a permit, start building tomorrow on many things without a lot of extra legwork dealing with the local governments. Here, much more complex process, a lot more players involved, much more time consuming in terms of making changes to those entitlements that may take 2 or 3 years or longer, depending on how complex and how many changes are being made. So that's a huge risk. But now, obviously, you can mitigate that risk, with the use of option contracts and a handful of other things, so that you don't actually obviously have to take full and complete ownership of the property. If you can negotiate a deal with the seller to get those entitlements in place before you actually will close on the deal and take ownership. But and that's a big piece of development, is in many cases just trying to figure out ways to mitigate your risk, to transfer the risk to potentially somebody else, so that hopefully you're not the one at the end of all of this, sort of holding an empty bag, wondering, what happened. But
and I'm going to ask even like the current market. So meaning, let's say I'm developing, and if you've been watching the news, you've seen what's happening with materials, lumber.
Oh yeah, huge.
Right.
Issue.
So how do you mitigate, right? Like I'm building, I don't know, 20 townhouses and that kind of stuff. And now, like, the pricing is gone, like in the contracts, and then they're saying I can't get the materials that cheap. And
yep, no, I mean, it's a multi-tiered issue and problem, because as the prices escalate with respect to materials and labor, and the entitlement issue, all of those are translated very easily into higher production cost overall, which means you're going to have to raise the price on the ultimate product that's being put out here into the market. But chances are you're not the only one facing those same, sorts of issues. And so everybody's price point is going to be rising. Thankfully, we are once again in a very dynamic market where there's a lot of demand for product currently. And I think, that's a big piece that, we can't ignore, that I don't want to say everyone wants to move to Florida, but certainly a very significant number of people want to move here, for whether it's the better weather, better, not having to have state income tax, whether it's other quality of life issues and or cost of living issues that may be different from where they're coming from. But all of that having been said, there probably is a cap at some point that, and whether we've reached that or we're getting very close to that, that's where it gets a bit scary because, as we're continuing to develop and build more and more product, we're going to have to, as we do, keep a close eye on, well, how quickly is it filling up? And that sort of wait time for the properties to actually become fully occupied, that's a good indicator of, well, we may need to slow down on the production side. But the problem is that the gestation period from beginning to end on a development project may be several years. And so, it almost always is the case that we build, and then we realize, oh, we built too much. Now you're stuck with a glut of inventory. Hopefully, once again, here in South Florida, we're sort of counterbalancing some of that with the fact that we have had so much growth. But then you also would have to say, well, most developers are aware of that, and they're continuing to build, and not really putting the brakes on early enough. Now, one could hope that that's where lenders and that's where local governments maybe come into play to some extent, and kind of say, hey, we think the market is a bit overheated. We are not going to issue any more building permits, or we're not going to make any more loans because we're scared that the market has reached the overbuilt sort of state, and we don't really want to look at the downside of that. So,
yeah, it's definitely, and it's even with local government, it's kind of, I think, a catch-22, right? They want to build that high rise because of all that new tax revenue coming in, or have these other companies in. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer on that is. It's always a little challenging on each end.
I mean, this is my 30-something years of having done this, and I started at the tail end of the horrible 80s of the 1980s in Texas, and seeing what took place there, and the vast wasteland that became of commercial real estate. Where, I mean, people that are my age and older can certainly remember whenever you had properties that were built for $10 million, were selling for 10% of that, at $1 million. And so, it's the sort of thing that whenever you've seen those kind of cycles in the market occur, you tend to maybe feel them a bit more. And I, personally, do kind of feel that we are at that peak. And someone told me, this is probably almost 30 years ago, a really successful developer in the 1980s. And he was one of the ones that got out and did very well of getting out. But he made a remark to me, and I never will forget this. He said, I was playing golf one day, and my caddy was talking about how much money that he had made in real estate over the past several months of buying homes and buying investment properties and this and that and the other thing. And I began to get a little bit worried because he didn't seem to have that much of a background in the field, and it was this whole sort of frothiness of the market at that particular point in time. I mean, it was just kind of like, if the average ordinary person without any skill, without any background, is making money, it's probably time to sell.
I had the same kind of story. My cleaning lady in 2006, she was also a real estate investor, and she had 3 homes. I was like, wow, okay. Like looking back at it, exactly what you're saying too. So I am going to put a quick poll because about the Master of Science program in real estate development. We just want to see what kind of interest you guys have while we're still kind of asking a couple more questions for Dr. Forgy here. So one of the things that, we're talking about, maybe development You know, and the second part of that question was also if you're building these 10, 20, $30 million and how long is your money tied up? I've run into developers. They thought they were going to get their money out. They thought they were going to be able to refinance out. And now they have to get more capital requirements. You know, and if you don't, I don't know, I guess the easiest way is if you don't think about that, you could be in a, I don't, you know, I'm not going to use the word, but something up creek.
Right. No, and that's true. That, you know, if you have a property that has, in the lender's eyes, gone down in value while you've had the loan with them, you know, there is, you know, that chance that you're not going to be able to refinance it. You know, and even selling the property may not be, you know, much of an option because you might just break even, or you might even lose money if you sold it. So you're caught in a horrible situation of, you know, your loan is coming due, let's say at the end of this 5-year period, and the building that you bought for $10 million is now worth $8 million, and you owe maybe $8.5 million. What do? You know, the lender's not going to refinance it, you know, necessarily for the 8.5 if it's only worth 8 million, and you're probably going to have a cash call that you're going to have to put in additional cash into it to, if you were to get it refinanced, and then you'll take a $500,000 loss if you were to sell it. So you're, you know, yeah, in a horrible situation, and you know, not many options there.
Absolutely. And by the way, today's not to scare you guys into investing. So I'm going to start with that. But the reason we're bringing this up is no one ever really thinks about it. Everyone's like got the rah, you know, we're going to make money kind of feeling. If you don't have exit strategies, or you don't have key partners, or you don't actually know how to evaluate this, right? Imagine I mean, you could do on-the-job training, which is going to cost you more than $36,000, you know, or you could really learn how to do this the right way and ask the right questions and basically mitigate your risk. Right. Some of the questions I'm asking, because unfortunately I was on the wrong side. I've had a lot of on-the-job training, and it wasn't very good. You know, it did cost me a lot of money. And, you know, I mean, that's why I wish there was a program around back when I started, you know, 20 years ago for something like this that really got my feet wet, to know what may or may not happen. Again, we don't know all the answers of what's going to happen, but if you could constantly mitigate your risk. One of the things I've done, I have a little 5-unit building, and I'm starting to use Airbnb. Right. And those numbers are going through the roof, but we still have a good exit strategy. Our debt service, it's easy to cover. We have reserves on that end of it. And then the other thing, I know you were talking about refinancing. I know a lot of guys, as you know, 5-10 years later, their values went from $1 million to, let's say, 1.8. And if you refinance your money out,
pulling the capital out.
Exactly, there's no tax on a loan. So there's a lot of different things of why people do, you know, refinances and all that other good stuff too. So I know we're almost out of time. So I don't know if Dr. Forgy, if there's anything else that that you want to tell our listeners, or tips, or what you think.
Have any other questions, I'm good. Casey, do you have anything else that you need to say or comment on?
Not really. I mean, if anybody has any questions about the MSRED program, about the admissions process, you can contact me at my contact information. Let me go ahead and put it in the chat box over here. So this is my cell phone number.
Awesome. I can include that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll include it in our thank you email. Do you guys mind? I know you were talking about the spreadsheet. If you send it to us, we'll make sure our listeners absolutely make it easier for you guys too.
Okay, perfect.
And what we'll do is, you know, obviously contact them directly, because I know you guys are going to have a lot of questions about the program, what it does, what it doesn't. Again, you have to be a member. So for the $249, if you're not a member, you know, talk about, I don't know what the rate of return on $8,600 for $249, but it's a lot. It's better than Bitcoin. So it's crazy not to be out there, you know, becoming a member, besides the other benefits that you get with here with BREIA and National REIA. We are super privileged. the commitment that NSU has to education is phenomenal. When I spoke to Tanya, and we met a couple of years ago, and she said, hey, we really as a university want to do something for our community, and to give that discount is ridiculous. So I just want to commend you guys for really always thinking bigger than yourselves, and a lot of universities don't think like this. So you guys are really kind of starting a trend. Maybe other universities will follow, but in the meantime, if you want to be in real estate, it's a no-brainer. Anything else, Casey, Dr. Forgy, anything else? Any last tips or anything that you would recommend? I got one, but I'll let you guys give one first.
Buy low, sell high.
Journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and the MSRD is your first step.
Absolutely. And you kind of stole mine. You sounded way fancier, but my point was stop waiting on the sidelines. There will be no perfect time to be in real estate. Meaning, if you're waiting for the bottom, okay, keep waiting. If you're waiting for the top, keep waiting. And during COVID and the pandemic, what we've noticed, even on investors on our side, the people that were investing before COVID are actually doing more deals now during COVID, including us. The people that were not doing any investing before COVID, guess what? They're not doing any deals during the pandemic. So when is it going to be your time, right? If you guys are afraid, hey, I don't know how to do this, these guys are giving you an education platform. Again, it's Saturdays, right? Hey, I get it. You got a full-time job, but what is your commitment? When's it going to be, right? Is it going to be another 2 or 3 years saying, oh man, Ryan and I, we kind of think about it. I know the pandemic and the forbearance and all the crazy things are happening. I feel like, and I love that these things are recorded. I feel like in 5 years from now, I'm just going to use that 5-year number, is that we're going to look back and say, wow, those were the good old days. Who knew? Rates are low, right? I mean, if you're as old as, as we are, rates were 18%, 20%. You guys are complaining about 4%, 5%. Shame on you.
Right.
On that. So,
well, thank you very much.
So, I want to thank you so much. We're definitely going to have you come back if it's okay with you guys, because I know we kind of just touched the surface a little bit today. I learned a bunch of things today too. So like, I'm being very selfish because, when you have, true professionals in your neighborhood that could really talk about what's happening down here, it makes a big difference too. So I want to thank you guys. I hope you guys have a great weekend. To our audience, the replay will be up by Monday. If you have any questions or concerns, you can email us and we'll go ahead and email it to their team. Also, I know some of you guys want more information, so I'll pass on that information to NSU and someone on their team will get back to you about that also. So thank you guys.
Thanks.
Have a great weekend. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.